Fear and ignorance have contributed so much over the years to meaningless torture and death. When an area has known such things, it can often be more than one location that's left with a dark stain of despair and ghosts. Hey there, dissectors, and if you're new to the channel, welcome. Today we're going to explore the ghostly history of the Salem Witch Trials. Not only is the infamous witch house plagued with entities, but also Old Burying Point Cemetery and the Hawthorne Hotel. The well-documented Salem witch trials of the 1690s came about when witch hunts were a common thing. But unlike the rest of the world, who saw it was all crazy nonsense pretty quickly, Salem was slower to grasp this, and 19 innocent lives were lost. Now, there were many reasons someone might be accused of being a witch. These included economic status, religion, age, even whether you seem slightly different to others. Teenage girls would very often be accused, with the youngest being aged just 4 years old. Midwives could even be suspected of devil worship if they helped deliver a baby and it was stillborn. Sadly, due to how little power women had back then, they were an easy target. And if an accused woman was married, often the husband would be charged alongside her. Think about it though for a moment. If you had a beef with someone back then, suggesting they were messing around with the devil would certainly be revenge in the harshest way, and sickeningly, it happened. There were different ways to test whether someone was a witch. These include the prayer test, as it was believed someone colluding with the devil would not be able to read words of scripture. The most popular was the Lord's Prayer. Any errors or stuttering or anything would point to you being evil. Another was the touch test, where victims of supposed possession would be touched by the accused. If the victim didn't react to the touch, that was great. But if they suddenly seemed calm, then this was evidence of being under a spell, and the accused again would be found guilty. Think about that for a moment too. How often might someone fake their reaction, especially if they're disliked or afraid in some way of the accused? Witch cakes were another method, which were as gross as they sound. The recipe was mixing the victim's urine with rye meal and ashes, which was then all mixed together and baked. Sounds yummy. This would then be fed to a dog, and if the animal started to bark or become aggressive at all, again, it was witchcraft. I'm pretty sure I would become aggressive if I was made to eat a urine cake. But the most common method used in Salem was the swimming test. The accused would be stripped of their clothes, hog-tied at their hands and feet, and then thrown into the river to see if they would sink or float. Now, water signified purity to them, as people were baptized and cleansed in it, much like christenings today. And so it was believed witches would struggle in such holy conditions and be rejected by the water, so float to the top. Crazy, I know. If you sank to the bottom, then you would be innocent, which was why often the accused would have a rope tied around their neck for easy hoisting from the water. Sadly, this didn't stop people drowning though. If found guilty in Salem, you would be sentenced to death, which would be by hanging and buried nearby. The Old Burying Point Cemetery on Charter Street is the resting place for many old residents of this time. Needless to say, ghosts have been seen wandering aimlessly, with nearby residents even stating that some have ended up taking shelter in their homes. Sounds horrifying. But one of the most infamous, hated entities that has been spotted at the cemetery and caught on camera numerous times by visitors at night is none other than Judge John Hathorne. Nicknamed the Hanging Judge due to the amount of people he sentenced to death, he was seen as a cruel man who enjoyed showing no mercy to the poor accused. He was a successful businessman in life, earning his fortune from trading with England and the West Indies. With his wealth, he managed to obtain a fair amount of land in Salem, which garnered him power, something he relished. He was cold, callous and twisted. More than 300 years since his death, he is still seen as a hateful man who showed no mercy, with many believing he used his position to purposefully murder. But he was not alone in his vile judging, as he had a long-time friend which he would work with on many of these cases, and his name was Jonathan Corwin. In 1675, Corwin purchased a property which is officially known as the Jonathan Corwin House, but more often than not is referred to as the Witch House. Due to it serving as a home for this judge, it's not surprising that the spirits of the wrongfully accused and slaughtered are said to be trapped here. When people were brought in for questioning and, let's be fair, torture, the witch house was often used for this purpose. With the sick-mindedness of both Corwin and Hawthorne, the atrocities carried out inside these walls was horrific. Between February 1692 and May 1693, more than 200 men, women and children were accused of witchcraft. Out of this number, 59 were tried, 31 were found guilty, and 19 women and young girls executed at Proctor's Ledge. The one man who did die was due to being crushed to death whilst being questioned and tortured. When found guilty, the only way to survive was to admit you were a witch and ask for forgiveness and to be redeemed. Things were that crazy that 2 dogs were executed too on suspicion of witchcraft. Corwin and Hawthorne were not the first judges of Salem though. That dishonour goes to Judge Nathaniel Salterston, who sentenced the first woman executed, called Bridget Bishop. Poor woman was 80 years old and a bit different than the others in town. She was thought of as wild and flamboyant, which led the Puritans to accuse her of being a follower of the devil. After her death though, it seemed to leave a bitter taste in the judge's mouth, and he resigned shortly after. The witch house has had many reports of haunted activity, with most visitors stating they have heard disembodied voices, and one of those being the young 4-year-old girl. People have been touched and grabbed at while cold spots are felt throughout the property. Guests have even been left with chills running up and down their body as they've walked around the house, which is now a museum. Some of the artefacts found here today include witch bottles, which were said to protect the house from anything evil. In the bottle, you would find hair, pins, and fingernails. There is also an old black shoe from a past owner at the museum, as back then it was believed if you placed the shoe inside a wall of your home, it would keep witches and warlocks away. In the kitchen of the house, you will find actual documents from the Salem Witch Trials to peruse. The most terrifying item on display, though, is an actual witchcraft doll called a poppet. It is said that witches would place hexes on the dolls to curse a person. The doll in the museum, though, was found in a house close by, owned by our very first woman executed, Bridget Bishop. This house is certainly stained in death. Out of the 2 judges and 12 jurors who participated in the slaughtering, Corwin is the only one who never showed any remorse, but this might have hit him hard on the ass, as he seemed to have been struck with some really bad luck, referred to as the Corwin curse. You see, he and his wife Elizabeth lost child after child to an early death. The oldest living child of theirs, called Anna, was born in 1687, and she only managed to reach the age of 19. Located at 310 Essex Street, Witch House is the only structure still standing from this terrible period in history, which is a stroke of luck, as back in 1944 it was set to be demolished so that the street could be widened. Locals didn't want to lose this part of their history, and so raised $42,000 to set the house back 35 feet where it currently sits. The witch house was then rewarded to the city of Salem, where they turned it into the museum that stands today. Another haunted location is the Hawthorne Hotel, located at 18 Washington Square, which was built on an apple orchard owned by Bridget Bishop. Guests have reported smelling apples throughout the property, even though apples are not actually offered on any menu. It also seems that Bridget may roam the halls, as a woman has been seen numerous times, stopping in doorways as if checking that everything is okay. But while the hotel is a lovely place to stay, guests have had other experiences too, with one woman waking up in the dead of night to find her son cowering at the bottom of the bed. Terrified, he told his mother that he could hear a child sobbing even though no one else was there. Others have experienced toilets flushing on their own accord and faucets turning on and off. Creepy stuff. The most active rooms are said to be 325 and 612, with people reporting having their bedsheets pulled from their bodies in the middle of the night, and others saying it got even more personal, with their hands and hair being stroked while they slept. In room 612, a female entity has been seen walking around the room before checking herself out in the mirror. This is an amazing historical place to visit, with many visitors coming along to take in the atmosphere around Halloween. In July 2017, on the 325th anniversary of the atrocities that were carried out, a memorial was placed in Salem dedicated to those that were wrongfully hung. It includes the names and dates of death of all 19 victims etched into granite. As well as this, there are also stone benches where locals and visitors leave flowers and offerings. The memorial entrance is inscribed with the pleas of innocence that are interrupted mid-sentence to show the indifference felt to their words and pain at the time. It is really a hard-hitting, emotional dedication, but one that will stand for many years to come as a reminder of how cruel ignorance can be.